Martijn Snoep, very warm welcome to Digital Markets Research Hub. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and I'm very grateful and honored for accepting the invitation for this conversation. The Dutch Competition Authority, the ACM, is quite a unique authority, not least because of its high-profile investigations, broader societal impact, but also because of the very mandate it has. You are also there for quite a long time, and you are headliners in so many different things. So much is going on in the Netherlands itself. So I wanted to start this conversation with inviting you maybe to provide an outline of the competences of the ACM and maybe the high-profile investigations and cases.
Yeah, no, very good. Now, Alice, first of all, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. And I feel honored that I can do this. It's already my second time. But indeed, like you're saying, the ACM is a different authority than most, if not all, other authorities in the Netherlands, and that has to do with its composition and its wide mandate. So in legal terms, we are the competition authority, we are the telecoms authority, we are the consumer protection authority, we are the public transportation authority, we are the energy regulator, energy authority, and we have some kind of small other mandate. So this is a very wide mandate. And when I joined the ACM 7 years ago, I was asked, one of the main tasks was to build a new strategy, which would combine all these different functions more structurally. The ACM is the result of a merger that took place now a little over 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 12 years ago. And so when I came in, the merger was already consumed and was for 5 years in practice, but there were remnants in the organization of the old structure. So it was a bit siloed. And I have always been a fan of the merger of the different authorities. So I think it made in a way sense that if you are a fan from the sidelines, well, then do it and make it work. And so together with the board and all the managers and leadership of the agency, we created a new kind of mission, which is making markets work well for all people and businesses now and in the future. So the way we see ourselves is as I would say, almost like an engineer of markets. So markets are fantastic. I strongly believe in that markets work efficiently and are really the preferred option to distribute scarce resources. But it doesn't mean that markets are perfect. Markets have inherent problems, all markets. And therefore, markets only function well in a social market economy if there are strong rules and enforced by an independent authority that has no political objectives, but only looks as a sort of technocrat to the functioning of markets. And that's what we are. So basically what we do all the time is, is this market functioning? And then we look at our toolbox and see what instrument do we have to make this market work well. And that can be anything. That can be, the traditional fine, but it can also be simple press release to make the public aware of something. It can be a discussion with the industry to say, well, you have to do something different because this is not working. It can be addressing the legislator, saying, well, we need new rules because this is not working. So this is our role under the umbrella of the combined mission. And, we're never done. And I can't say everything we do is perfect. But this is, I think, what makes us unique, also rather unique in a European context. I don't know of any other authority maybe even in the world, that has such a combined vision and mandate. And this came about by luck and insight. So fortunately, there were a couple of people who had the vision and the idea that this would be a good idea. And then they brought it forward and convinced Parliament that this was a good idea 13 years ago. And then second, we were lucky because consumer protection, competition, and telecoms all fell within one ministry at the time, and energy. And within a ministry, it is much easier to combine different entities that are part of kind of the diaspora of a ministry, rather than if they are spread out over different ministries. One of the reasons why there are relatively few competition authorities merging with consumer protection agencies, while it all makes sense, is because often consumer protection falls within the Ministry of Justice and competition in the economy. And how governments work everywhere, there's always this tribalism in fights between ministries. And, if they would merge consumer protection with competition, it's like, who is the boss here? And which ministry has the ultimate say? And so it was luck and insight that this merger came about 13 years ago. And for us, it works very well.
My very basic intuition about the distribution of powers and also kind of the understanding of your mandate between the ministries and competition agencies and any kind of watchdogs is that the ministers are by definition political entities, and they are here primarily not to make the markets work, but make the markets work to deliver some X result, which is beneficial or in the interest of the polity which the minister is administering. Whereas a canonical perception of competition authorities or any other kind of watchdog type of independent agencies is that you have to be completely neutral. And as you just highlighted, you have to look at the markets regardless of the political interferences. That would be an easy textbook solution for a stable world where things are predictable, when the history is ended, and we are just refining and calibrating the nuances. But we live in very turbulent, hectic times where all these canons and borderlines are being reconsidered, any types of borderlines. You are in the epicenter of these processes. Can you highlight your understanding of how this borderline should be reconsidered?
Yeah, I still believe in the independent technocratic model, in the sense, of course, not for everything, but I think to have a neutral market regulator that is not influenced by the whims of politics and does not have to win a constituency or win an election. I think that makes for stable, predictable market intervention. Very similar to the independency of the central bank. We want an independent central bank that has as main objective price stability and maybe a few other objectives. And that's also for us. Main objective is to make these markets work well. And yes, sometimes that means that policy decisions need to be made. And then the question is, did the government or did the legislator grant us this policy discretion, or it didn't? And if it didn't, then we asked the legislator, what do you want? These are the options. And if they gave it to us, we'll make a very transparent, open decision with the objective of the mission to make markets work well. And of course, what is well? What is working well? And that's difficult to answer. And our recipe for that is that we make it transparent. So we will define well by showing this is how it works now. This is what we think how it works well, how it should work to make it well. and we cross that bridge. So we do the transition through these means. And then, of course, if the legislator does not agree with it, fine, they can make a law and define well in a different way. And then, of course, we have to live by that law. But ultimately, I think so far so good. The Dutch legislator gives us a lot of trust, and of course we need to earn that trust. But I think by and large, and also the public, they trust our kind of objectives and the way we rule, and that we do this impartially and purely with the objective to make markets work well for people and businesses, both. So that's always what we say. We are called the authority for consumers and markets. I considered at some point in time when we were kind of working on our mission, we could change the name, because it seems that we're only concerned about consumers, which is not true. We're also concerned about businesses. There are no markets without businesses. So that's why we also look at how businesses function. And same thing, we're not looking at consumers only in the sense of functioning, buying, financially driven human beings, but also as citizens. So, for example, if we do a merger, maybe we can talk about that later, media plurality and the influence on democracy is very important to us, even in the merger control context on the basis of competition law.
We will definitely revert to this really topical issue, but my final question on this matter: if you are essentially, it can be compared, a person in your power can be compared to an author who has been given different elements to create a jigsaw puzzle, to create a mosaic.
Yeah.
And you can create out of identical ingredients, of same ingredients of consumer interests, business interests. They are not homogeneous. You can give preferences: greener, faster, more digital, more pro-European, more cheaper, etc. So there could be different priorities and thus different outcomes. And you often are being touched and said, Martin, the world is burning. Let us do something. Europe has to do something, and we have to be more agile, more focused on delivering pro-European results, etc. So the question is twofold. A, is it possible to do it, or is it we have to manage our expectation? We shouldn't expect for competition agencies even to deliver something, even if they would be willing to do it. And B, do you think it would backfire? Even if it's possible to do, you will do more harm than good in the long-term perspective.
No, so I'm not of the competition is a side dish school. So I believe competition combined with all the other elements that we have. So it's consumer protection, all the powers under the Data Act, the Data Governance Act, the AI Act. So the Digital Services Act, everything combined, I think gives us a responsibility to do everything to make markets work better. That means not only saying no to things, but also to make positive influences on the market. So let me give you an example. One of the policy objectives that we are now working on and that will grow over time is the need that we believe, and that I think that many people in Europe believe, is that Europe should become more digitally sovereign. Not fully sovereign, but more sovereign. I tend to compare it with kind of the dependency on Russian gas. Europe was dependent for 90% on Russian gas. It was not healthy. We know that. And so we had a crisis, And we reduced the dependency and are now obtaining our natural gas from multiple sources, which is much better. In the 1970s, we were fully dependent on oil from OPEC countries. We were just too dependent on oil. We had the crisis of the 1970s was necessary, and then through a whole sort of number of measures, we reduced that dependency on OPEC oil. And I think that gave us as a continent more sovereignty. We didn't become completely self-sufficient. I think that the price for that is just too high. But reducing the dependency on one country or one or two companies is extremely important for Europe to be able to keep its values, to keep its welfare, and to keep and protect its social market economy. So it's a stretch. So we see in digital where our dependency on basically three US-based big IT companies with strong cloud services offerings, often combined with services, IT services, and functionalities on which we very much depend and are used to apply. Look at your desktop and the way I don't know how it is with you, but I've never used. Well, I think in the very early days I used a different word processing program than Word, but other than that, I grew up with Word, and that creates a dependency. And the question, and I think we should reduce that dependency, and that requires a sort of whole of government approach, and where we play a role, but not the only role. And so we need, on the one hand, we need to stimulate demand for alternative European-based services, and we can do that by creating awareness among businesses. That's also what we do, creating awareness in the government, and creating awareness about the business risk and the operational risk of being so dependent on three US-based companies and one in particular. I think what we do is, other than creating the awareness, is also think with the government, because the government is a big customer of IT services. What from the government can we move to alternative suppliers? And there, I think we also play a role as one of the agencies. We are a customer ourselves, but we also have tools among these various laws that maybe can make a transition easier. If we look at what are switching barriers? Well, that's data portability where there are difficulty. That's interoperability if you use multiple systems. That's bundling of services. So with our digital powers and our competition powers, we also look at this from our perspective. And then from the other side, so we think about how can we stimulate the demand side to partially switch to other European providers. We also look at the supply side, which is sort of part of an industrial policy, if you want to say so, for Europe. And there, our role is, I think, more limited. We have no state aid competencies. But what we can do is, well, maybe one step back. There, sort of, if I talk to suppliers in Europe, you get sort of mixed messages. Some say, well, we need more investors to scale up. And the capital union is not finished, and therefore that's a problem. Others say, well, we have plenty of money. That's not the issue. We need technologists, and most of them come from either Asia or the US, and immigration restrictions hamper us. Another group says, no, we have enough money, we have enough technologists, we simply need customers. And then the fourth says, no, there are customers, or there will be customers, we'll get technologists, we'll have the money or get the money. But the problem is that we need to scale up quickly. And for that, we need to merge or cooperate with our smaller peers in Europe. And there, of course, we can play a role. And it's also what we do, what we offer to the market is that if for some reason European IT companies believe that they need to cooperate or merge or do whatever is necessary to create viable European suppliers, and they think that competition law stands in the way, come to us. And we'll be happy to find a solution, because it can't be that our competition laws stand in the way of creating alternative players into a market that's being dominated by one to three players, depending on how you look at the market. So I think this is our general philosophy and our policy, and using all instruments again, competition law, data act, data governance act, DSA, and to make this market work better from a technocratic point of view, but of course with big public policy implications.
I have this privilege of when preparing video to re-listen the bits which are of most relevance. So I will definitely revert to different components of your answer, which are very, very informative and really meaningful. On the last point, just for DMA enthusiasts, how you said when IT so all this sector, how important the core platform services are for European digital sovereignty? Is it this DMA and consumer-oriented big tech industry only a part in the overall picture, or it is a core of digital revolution?
Yeah, I think when you look at it now, it's part of our digital dependency and the problem with the lack of European digital sovereignty are in the core platform services. But we know that some of the services are not considered core platform services, either because they're not a platform service or they're not core of the platform. And I think we need to. This is how these laws develop. It's not because the people who built and created and drafted the DMA were stupid or forgotten. But since then the world has changed, and I think what happened is that even in markets where there are three players, cloud market, three big players, maybe if you look at it from a distance, it may seem competitive, but as we demonstrated in our cloud investigation report from, I think it was 2022, it's not a competitive market. There are really serious issues in that market that we need to address. And of course, we never thought that this dependency on US-based cloud providers would also have geopolitical implications, or could have geopolitical implications. I never thought about it. And it's only recently that I came to realize is that, wow, we are so dependent in our societies on kind of the whims of three players. And I'm sure these three players, they mean well. They're not out to kind of dominate us and destroy our European values. But on the other hand, I think we have to be realistic. And if they receive a call from the president of their country to do something to reduce their services to Europe, I'm sure they will listen more to their president than to Mrs. von der Leyen, who will make a call after that and ask her not to do it. That's just the reality of geopolitics. And because of that reality, we need to be more self-sufficient, not fully self-sufficient, but we need to be more self-sufficient. We saw it, what happened at the International Court of Justice here in The Hague, in the criminal court. Of course, we don't know all the details, and so I haven't. The only things I know from publications, but the mere threat and the mere idea that you can be sanctioned by these cloud providers indirectly, I think is enough to rethink the model that we have now and to really start building and preparing ourselves for a more European focused IT industry. And I would even say, even if that means that in that transition period, the quality of the service will go down. Our dependency is, I think, our independency as a continent is much more important than the value of the service. Of course, we should be able to communicate, and we should be, our functions, our financial software, and our everything should continue to work. So I'm not saying that we should take irresponsible risks, but I think accepting a quality that may be slightly lower is worthwhile to remain independent or to be independent.
I remember in several of your speeches how impressively technical you've been in talking about different digital markets, and also how you have highlighted the behavioral aspects, how nuanced the engagement of big tech companies into tailoring the nitty-gritty of all behavioral patterns, choice architecture, all this choice screens, etc., is how much they invest into it and how far ahead they are. So but the question is twofold. Based on your understanding of technicalities, do you think that the core platform service of cloud is less dependent on network effects and on the default settings and on consumer preferences, and thus it is easier to break this oligopolistic market and to allow meaningful entries from Europe? And B, is the gap between our public enforcers' understanding of the mechanics of digital business models and their understanding of those who design these business models, is the gap decreasing over the last years?
Yeah, maybe to answer your first, no, I think business users are just as vulnerable to dark patterns and smart network architecture. And it was interesting. I talked recently to people from the IT community, and they said what I found interesting. I never realized how that worked. Is that apparently, particularly in the Netherlands, Microsoft has been extremely successful for decades. And that means that you now have generations of IT specialists who've been trained in Microsoft architecture. And basically, Microsoft is doing very well in keeping relationships and not in an illegal way. So not bribing, and this is not what I'm suggesting. It is just a very smart business model, and those people who've been working with Microsoft, maybe like you and I, for decades with Word, you have to tell them, listen, you have to change to a different word processing program. Yeah, it's not as good as Microsoft's Word, but it's almost as good. That means that you have to learn a new interface. You have to invest time in figuring out how it works. You have a transition problem because there's portability. You need, your old Word files need to be transposed to whatever new program it is, you lose your footnotes or your citation index or whatever. There it is going to be and you and I will not like it. So that means that you need to have a strong push from your company or from the government to say, I know it's painful, but you have to do it. Ultimately, it's better for all of us if we become less dependent and make markets more competitive and become more self-sufficient as a European economy. And that, I think, requires policymakers with the backing of Parliament for a policy drive. You need regulators, like financial regulators, who tell their banks and insurance companies, listen, it's too dependent. It's also systemic risk for the financial industry if you're so dependent on one country. It's like one country. It's just like if you do an investment. You put all your investments in one country, not a good idea. You want to spread the risk. It's the same with your IT operations. And then thirdly, I think in the unregulated businesses, maybe the auditors will talk to the businesses and say, well, is this an operational risk? What do you do? What's your plan B? What will happen if US cloud providers will no longer provide you with all the services, will reduce the services, whatever they can do. And I think that's something that we need to prepare for, think about, and also develop a plan B.
But moving to specific cases, we know that you are often associated with the pioneering work in examining and investigating anti-competitive conduct of Apple. Can I ask you please to update us on the latest in this regard?
So what we did, we started an investigation, I think more than 4 years ago. It's been a while. And it was before the DMA, basically in Apple's App Store practices. So as you know, Apple has basically two sets of App Store conditions for app providers. One is what's called Schedule 1. And basically that applies to free apps where there are no paid services in the app. So let's say Uber. It's a free app. You put it on your iPhones for free, and the services that are being provided out on the street by the driver, and you pay. There's a direct payment. The payment does not go through the app. The content is not being delivered through the app. That's the proper word. So that's Schedule 1. They pay an annual fee, very modest. And then you have Schedule 2. And in Schedule 2 are apps where through the app, digital content is being provided. The example, and that was also the complainant in our case, is Tinder. If you use the Tinder dating app, you can pay for extra services that are being provided through the app. And so you get sort of premium service, better quality dates, you can do extra features, and you pay for that, and the service is being provided through the app. For Schedule 2 app providers, they are required to use Apple's payment system. They are not allowed to steer customers away outside the app to make payments through different payment methods. And thirdly, they have to pay 30% a commission of 30% of all the revenues to Apple. There are a few exceptions, and there's for long-term plans it's a smaller amount, but for the sake of the story, let's keep it at 30%. And that's we found, that's discrimination. You basically, if you take the example, you treat Uber substantially different than Tinder. And that's why we started an investigation on the basis of 102A. So it was exploitative abuse. And we were in a big fight with Apple. And the good news is that now, I think 2 weeks ago, we received our first favorable judgment by the district court, so it's the court of first instance, where the court, I think, really made, of course, they favored our opinion, so they were right. But I think in a very interesting opinion, they, first of all, which is I think not as controversial as it was 4 years ago, they define the relevant market as the market for App Store services on iOS, so Apple's operating system, for dating app providers on an EEA-wide scale. So that was a narrowly defined market share, where obviously Apple has 100% market share. And I think this is not, maybe to some that's a controversial part, but I don't think that's the most controversial or telling part of the judgment. The most telling part is about the abuse. And I think on the abuse, is interesting. The court started, with their kind of the regular mantra is that companies with a dominant position have a special responsibility. And then second, they said, price differentiation or price discrimination is not per se illegal for a company with a dominant position. But, and here I think there comes the interesting part, there needs to be a justification for the differentiation. And Apple continuously said, well, first of all, they said, well, yeah, we do this, we differentiate because we can. They have no, basically, they said, we have the freedom to differentiate, so we do this because we can. And the court said, no, you can't. You need to have a justification for that within certain margins. And what the court said then as a rule was that a company with a dominant position cannot impose conditions that are beneficially to the company with a dominant position, but disproportionately burdensome to its customers, where the customers cannot reasonably decline these conditions. So because of this dependency, I wouldn't say super dominance, but because of the dependency from the customers on a company with a dominant position, there is a disbalance between the two. And if I only benefit from it, and it's kind of disproportionately burdensome to my customers, I make an abuse of a dominant position, an exploitative abuse of a dominant position. And I think that is key and extremely interesting in this decision, and also important for the way forward, how we apply 102A in Europe. The interesting thing is now, in the coming years, I think this domain will become more clear. Apple has already announced that it will appeal the decision. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't hope so, but could be that the Court of Appeal will ask for preliminary questions. Will ask the Court of Justice preliminary questions in this case, and there are also a couple of other preliminary cases and cases by the Commission on exploitative abuse that are now coming up through the court system. So this is a very exciting new development of our competition laws, where it seems that Article 102A is being rejuvenated, brought back to life again. It was dead for a while, which I think is a good way. It was our legislate. I mean, you can say everything about it. I mean, I understand a theoretical debate that it's not good. It's not wise for a competition authority to apply this. I don't agree, but I understand the argument. But at the same time, we live in a democracy. These are our laws, and we have to enforce them. Even, that's the way it is. So, and yes, that's different than in the US, but that's why we have a European model. We don't live under US competition law. We have European competition law that supports our social market economy, which is different than the economic model in the US. So referring to the fact that US antitrust law is different is not a convincing argument.
A few questions in this regard. And the first one, we have a similar decision, to some extent, similar decision under the DMA by the Commission. So I wanted to ask you about the elephant in the room, compliance. How to assure effective compliance in the industry where the liable undertaking knows so much more about the technicalities of things and can adjust and can complicate the things for their business users to ad infinitum, and has a history of being rather villain in terms of compliance.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, couple of points. So from our Apple case, when we imposed an order to stop certain behavior and to implement other behavior to Apple. So we didn't impose a fine. And we had long discussions with Apple about compliance with the order. And there was a huge information asymmetry. But what we did is we engaged specialists, IT specialists, outside IT consultants, basically to help us, and also people experienced with user experience, platform or app design. But all in all, and that's kind of the second element, we are too small ultimately to fight Apple and to change Apple behavior. For one thing, I mean, the best we can do is change a few things for Dutch consumers, but we have no authority outside our borders. So ultimately, we believe that this is a fight that should be fought at the European level. And we hope that our case, will support indirectly the fight that's been taking place at the European level. And there, I think we shouldn't be too shy. Europe is still a very attractive market with affluent consumers. I'm not so afraid that for commercial reasons, companies will withdraw from the European market or will no longer invest in the European market. The European market is just too rich and too thick to be ignored. For political reasons, it may be different. So this is why, coming back to what I said earlier about the cloud industry, for commercial reasons, the cloud providers will never abandon Europe or will never punish Europe for anything. But for political reasons, they may. And it is that reason that, and because the cloud infrastructure, the AI stack or the cloud stack or the Euro, whatever you want to call it, that is so crucial to the backbone of our societies. That's why I think there we need to build European alternatives and create European alternatives. Although I have full sympathy for dating apps and dating app providers, it's in the level of severity or importance in our society. There is a difference between our cloud infrastructure on which the government and all businesses run, and the functioning of dating app providers. We can live for a while without dating app providers. We cannot live for a while without cloud infrastructure.
And also in this context, it's good to notice that all the accusations of being protectionist is essentially meaningless, because the main beneficiaries of the DMA at the moment are also US business users, or even horizontal challengers. But speaking of business users and Match.com in particular, and when, for example, when we look at the compliance workshops in the DMA, how boring those where business users are not active, how boring this works, or how, let's say, didactically dry these workshops are, and how vivid and emotional they become once we have a meaningful business user who knows the nitty-gritty of things and who can somehow trigger the dynamic, trigger the channel, the enforcers in the right direction. How important this communication with business users is. And you have been running with Fiona Scott Morton last year a workshop where you were trying to articulate this dimension of the DMA and all competition policy. Can you update us on this?
So we still see that business users are reluctant to get involved for, I think, two reasons. So first of all, they are afraid to be punished by the big gatekeepers. So that keeps, some of them aren't. So they're also very brave ones, but there are also a couple of them who are just simply afraid. They tell us also. It's not theoretical. And then second, particularly for smaller companies, they constantly need to think, what do I invest my money in this and my time? There's also a sense of opportunity cost. Will I, enter into these workshops? Will I try do my best to negotiate and deal with regulators and express my concerns, or will I use that time and capacity to build my business? And I understand that that's a dilemma, and that there are also many business users who say, well, I'll deal with a situation, I adapt to the circumstances and try to create a business out of that. And that's why I think ultimately, and this is no criticism on the DMA, but ultimately for our core systems and dependency, the DMA is not going to be sufficient or enough. We need to build our own European infrastructure for cloud services and for certain IT functionalities around it. With the DMA, you're too vulnerable as a continent for geopolitical tensions. And I think that type of look, and that's not for everything. And so it's fine to be dependent for your, for certain apps or for certain video content or marketplaces, even on US-based platform service providers. But for the core systems in a country, you need also your own infrastructure. So basically it's the same. We have the same discussion in energy, also kind of core service for, and what you have now in Europe with our defense. So I think I see it in this. So part of the IT market, of the digital market, belongs in the same box as defense and energy. And you need some sort of sovereignty, more, and in any event, more sovereignty than now on these particular services.
And isn't it the case, I'm trying. I'm not trying. I will be probably a little bit provocative in terms of the substance of my question. Isn't it the case that what we have currently in Europe, what we see, those who try to challenge the status quo, in looking at core platform services, for example, they put forward some, I shouldn't say eccentric, probably ethically or normatively superior models of being greener, though slower, being more privacy mindful, etc. But is it the case that by relying on this kind of Christiania style alternatives, we can probably serve the niche, but it is hard to be mainstream without copying or following the business models which are already very well
Yeah.
tailored by the current gatekeepers. And thus you have to get a little bit dirtier in terms of on mainstream and exploit vulnerabilities of consumers, all their stickiness of default, etc. How do we, does this plea for European digital sovereignty also require us to become less ethically obsessed and more kind of pragmatic, dry, and cynical, or this, or we can do it in a genuinely European way?
Well, I don't know exactly what a genuine European way is, of course, but
In the chicken of tomorrow way.
in the chicken of tomorrow way. No, I think what we can do is I would say, because of the comparison with energy and with defense, uh, the most important thing now is that we have alternate European alternatives in place. And the one thing I I am worried about, and I think that we should not fall into the trap, is that we create one European alternative. And I think that's not good. You know, yes, it is maybe better to be dependent on one European alternative than on one alternative outside Europe, but that's only more slightly better. I think we need a more competitive, more open market in Europe. And of course, the market has its limitations in size on a global scale. So that probably means that we cannot have tens of competing players, but a few players, so that we can also keep healthy competition alive in Europe between European players is important. And I think that is the main objective is to reduce dependency. And there, I think I come to your point. Yes, it would also be very nice to have a more consumer friendly, more privacy friendly, etc. offering. But ultimately, that is not for me to decide, but for the policymakers to decide. That comes into the second place.
I know we are approaching the end. I have two questions, so let me combine. And I wanted to ask you about the remedies. We hear more and more often that remedies have to be more agile, so to say, and maybe are designed in a kind of fashion where you can test, experiment, see what works, what not, or maybe be result oriented rather than process oriented. What are your views on this?
Yes, I agree. So now our remedies, we are pretty, and we're all are, including the ACM, we are pretty unsophisticated with our remedies, and they're also rather static, in the sense that, we impose certain remedies either by law or by administrative decision, and they stay like that. And we really look at input, at efforts, and not so much at output. What is the effect of the remedy? And I think what we should do is move more towards output remedies, where we want to see certain results rather than certain inputs. And that's, I think, a change. And I don't want to claim that I know exactly how it works, but I do see that our current system of remedies is not functioning the way it should be. We cannot achieve the things that we want to achieve. So this is one thing. And second, it is important to look at all these issues in the digital area, not only through one lens of the DMA or competition law, where an authority imposes remedies to make the market work again. We should also look, what we've been saying throughout the hour is on our industrial policy, on how to create European alternatives, because only DMA and competition style remedies are not enough to move a market. And more is necessary than simply that.
My next question, and the last one, before inviting you to provide recommendations to students, is an invitation to update on an important media plurality case in the Netherlands, please.
No, thank you. I think that's a great opportunity, and also something that's fun for students to look at. And I'll come back to the recommendations for students. Is that we are continuously developing our merger policy and our merger review policy, and we dealt with, decision came out earlier this week, with a merger between the largest publisher of newspapers and free online news, called DPG, a Flemish Belgium newspaper group. And they were buying the Netherlands branch of RTL, which is a big commercial broadcaster in Germany, obviously, and in other countries, but also in the Netherlands. And the German commercial broadcaster, so RTL group, wanted to sell RTL Netherlands. 2 years ago, we blocked a merger between RTL and a competing smaller Dutch commercial television broadcaster for competition issues in the television advertising market. So then came number two, which was the newspaper company, who were interested in branching out into television. And there, I think we made it we did an investigation for a year and a half, so very in-depth investigation, because media is important for functioning of a democracy, for our society, and for keeping our society and democratic society alive. And if you are a competition authority and you review a merger between, let's say, two banana producers or importers, if you get it wrong, so if you think you give a green light and nevertheless they create a dominant position and are able to increase prices of bananas will go up. Well, not great, but you can afford it as a society. Here, if we would get it wrong, and we would allow the merger without remedies, and media plurality would be significantly endangered, then of course, you pay a very high price for getting it wrong. So this was also difficult. And then second, it was also difficult because we not only looked at it from, well, if we give a green light and we do it wrong, then and a dominant position is being opinion power is being built through this merger, which will negatively affect our democracy. But we also looked at the fact, but if we block the merger, what will happen with RTL Netherlands? Because RTL Group said we want to sell it anyway. And during the course of our investigation, we found out that actually our media sector is totally unprotected. So there is a media regulator, but they don't have the power to block mergers. There is foreign direct investment rules on a sector by sector basis, but the media sector is not on this list. So that will mean that RTL could also sell RTL Netherlands to, I don't know, a country or a media company in a country that is pretty hostile to the Netherlands. Not a very comfortable position. And then in that same counterfactual analysis, we also took into account that RTL has normal linear television which is a bit of a, I would say, a business that is declining, has been declining, and will decline in the future because less and less people watch linear television. They still do, but it's becoming less. And more people use the streamers. So they watch television via video streaming platforms. And RTL had a very successful streaming platform. So it could well be that a company would buy the video streaming platform business or buy the entire business and then basically cut the linear television or kind of not invest further in linear television, but continue to invest in video streaming. And one of the good things for media plurality in the linear television offering of RTL in the Netherlands was its news. So it has a very good news show. And from that, they also have a free news app that is being used. And basically in the Netherlands, we have 3 free news apps. That's the one from the public broadcasters. That's the one from DPG. And that's the one from RTL. So this merger actually means a reduction in that particular segment of the market from 3 to 2. And of course, that gave us headaches. Ultimately, we approved the merger with what we call kind of semi-structural remedies. And that means that the free news app of DPG and the free news app of RTL have to remain independent. They get a minority shareholder in the form of an independent foundation that protects their independency commercially and from an editorial point of view. And also without the approval of the foundations, the entities cannot be sold. So they will remain as such. And there is a obligation, and that's more kind of a behavioral commitment, to continue to offer free online news. Because the fact of the matter is that many people consume news from the free sources. Newspaper subscriptions are still okay-ish, but the majority in the country, they take their news from free sources, whether that's public broadcasting or commercial broadcasting, and now more and more through the 3 main news apps. And plurality in that segment of the market is important for a viable democracy. So I think that this is the first time, at least the first time I know that any competition authority really imported all the elements from a traditional media plurality test into the traditional merger test. It is fascinating reading. We will publish the decision, 185 pages, within a couple of weeks. The summary is available online, also in English already. And what's also interesting, we asked 2 academics from the University of Utrecht to give us an opinion on how media plurality can be introduced into the merger test, drawing upon inspiration from the European Media Freedom Act.
This is amazing. A quick follow-up, if we still have a minute or so.
Yes, sure.
Martijn Snoep as mythbuster about the complexity of economic evidence in merger scrutiny, that we have this kind of message here very often, that things become so complicated and thousands of pages, econometric evidence, etc. How important, all things considered, this process is of technicalization? Is it overstated? Is it just because the stakes are so high, you have to scrutinize a lot and parties submit so more and more technical stuff? Or it is actually becoming insurmountable at some point?
I like merger modeling. So we use econometric evidence and we build our own econometric models in mergers as well. And of course, we review the submissions of the parties, but what it's not enough. And it's only, econometric models are only a reflection of reality. So old-fashioned, hardcore, qualitative research is also necessary and will remain necessary in this. But I think it's good to have access to both. So our technicians, our econometricians in our economic department are masters in building models with fantastic outcomes, but they are predictions of the future that are equally good as qualitative assessments. And I think you need both to keep proper checks and balances between the two. Of course, the difficulty is when they are going into different directions. If the econometric models say prices will go up, but the qualitative evidence say the reverse or the other way around. And then it becomes more difficult is who do you trust more? And that's ultimately that is a judgment call. I think more than, and this is also what I find extremely interesting in doing both cartel and abuse cases and merger cases. Merger cases are always about predicting the future, and therefore inherently unsure. We have to. It is a guess. It's our best guess based on a balance of probabilities test, but it is not more than that, and that's why I'm always afraid to get it wrong with a decision. And well, if you look back in a cartel case, you can become convinced of what actually happened. Of course, there's still margin of error there as well, but I feel more solid there. With merger control, it's forward looking, and we all know how uncertain the future is and how things can suddenly change. But that at the same time, it makes it extremely interesting. And what we did, for example, in this DPG RTL case, we held a public hearing, and we let people also react to each other's statements and issues, and I think that creates a sort of inclusive, open, and transparent way of decision making. That's well, we're going to do that more often in the future. And I also gave an interview in a newspaper where instead of instead of defending our case or defending our decision, I explained the dilemmas and how difficult it is, and I think also that helped in the acceptance of the decision in the general public.
And when the decisions from your practical experience and maybe communication with other peers, heads of competition agencies globally, when the decision, this any high profile merger decision is appealed in court, do judges generally tolerate this margin of discretion in merger cases and they look only at some procedural mistakes, or some of them also somehow try to do policy making by reverting the narrative and opting for another choice?
I think it's a little bit in the middle. So what in the administrative system the judges do is, of course, they check for procedural errors, and that's important. So they if is everyone being heard? Are the time limits respected? That's all the basic stuff. That's what they check, which is good. But they also do is is it logical? Is there somehow logic in the reasoning? And is it consistent, the reasoning? But they do not replace our judgment call with theirs. I think that is, and they shouldn't, because that's our job. And they should check whether we could make this judgment call on the basis of the evidence available, not what their judgment call would be. And I'm happy with the way our courts, but also the European courts, deal with this question.
Great. And now recommendation to student, please.
A recommendation for students is basically to really look at particularly the competition law students and the competition economics students, to see and to continue to look at competition law as a tool for human progress, for your society, as an instrument for good, and not so much as a technical point of view. I developed my thinking as well. I think at one point in time, if I now look back at my own professional career, I looked at competition law more as a very technical means. I was obsessed with, what is exactly a dominant position and what is an abuse, and I was comparing paragraph 221 with the last sentence of paragraph 228 in another judgment, and very technical, very detail oriented. And now in the position I'm in, and I hope that students can do that as well, is we think, why do we have competition law? What do we want to achieve? Why is market power bad? How can we best intervene against market power? So ask yourself these very fundamental questions before you delve into the topics, into the details. And I think that's an important, because that makes you, whether you become a lawyer or you become a business person or you become a government official, in all those areas, it is better to start from more of a holistic view than from the technicalities.
Martijn Snoep, thank you very much indeed for yet another fantastic, in many respects, eye-opening conversation. It was a pleasure.
Welcome. You're welcome. It was fun to do. Thank you very much, Oles.